All right, what's up, people? Yeah, it's Monday. I still have to do another 8 hour shift. It sucks. And I have to do another 8 hour shift on a Wednesday. So today is going to be episode 13 of our incredible NFL series. I hope you football fanatics is ready for the upcoming NFL preseason and then ultimately the NFL season itself. So here is a special episode that you thought would never happen on my series. It's gonna be the legendary, the forever talented football player that played in the 1990s and could have played in the 2000s if he really wanted to because he was that damn good. Barry Sanders versus Steve Mcnair, the running back versus the quarterback. You already know what it is. Detroit Lions versus the Tennessee Titans. Now, this one might get the most views. We might get a combinations of a lot of thumbs ups, a couple of thumbs downs. Here, we might get a bunch of comments. Some might be good comments, some might be bad comments. But you will like this video, and I promise you, you will love this video. So let's get into it, shall we? Now, in the city of Detroit, there is a lot of things in the city of Detroit. There is there is there is RoboCop. Every city's got to have a superhero. So they had RoboCop. They had the Detroit basketball Pistons, the Bad Boy Pistons. And of course, they had, the Motor City. They made cars, they make trucks, General Fords. And then they had a football team, the Detroit Lions. Now, this football franchise had been around for the past 50, 60 years, and they won 4 championships, 4 Super Bowls. Of course, they was first a part of the AFC, and then they became a part of the NFL, and they won 4 Super Bowls. They did a merger. So to this day, when people ask how many championships the Detroit Lions have, people always bring up 4 championships. Some will argue it's actually 2 championships than actual 4 because they won 2 when there was a part of another football league, and then they actually won 2 championships in the actual NFL. 2 plus 2 is 4. So people always say 4 championships, 4 Super Bowls. Now, in 50 to 60 plus years, the Detroit Lions gone to a Super Bowl a total of 5 to 6 times, but only won 4 out of the 6 times they gone to a Super Bowl. Now, this is a football team that's largely underrated, not appreciated, not respected, not given credit for anything. Until a football player by the name of Barry Sanders gave the Detroit Lions an identity. He became the Detroit Lion. And this was a running back. This weren't no quarterback. This weren't no wide receiver. This was a running back who had the most single touchdowns, the most single rushed yards. He could run on the side, up the middle, down right, up left. Down the right, up the left, down the right. It didn't matter to him. You give him the football, and he was gone. You know those cartoons where that dog tries to catch the coyote? He was the coyote. He was not the coyote. He was that little thing that go beep beep. He ran that fast. Before there was Richard Sherman. In a way, if you think about it, he really was Richard Sherman and Wilson and all these football players that we have today. He was them before they even came into the NFL. He was so good that he actually could play at 2 different positions at the same exact time. There was one football game where a football player got seriously injured on the Detroit Lions, I think in the 1993 or 1994 NFL season, and he was asked to go from playing running back to, I think, either playing star safety or wide receiver, and he did it the second half of the football game. So the first half, he played his position, and in the second half, he played someone else's position, and they actually won the football game. Now, he only done that maybe once or twice his whole entire 10 years, because he only played 10 years of professional football. And if you take all the football players that we have today in the NFL, if you take all of the players from today and you put them into that system in the 1990s, they would not even be able to do a mere fraction of what Barry Sanders could do in the NFL. You take Barry Sanders from the 1990s and you implement him in today's NFL system, he would do the same exact thing 10 times over. You would not be able to see him. You will not be able to catch him. You won't even be able to know he's behind you and then past you. And by the time he gets into the end zone, he would have gotten in there 7 times in a row. And he wasn't even a quarterback, and he played like one. He wasn't a wide receiver, and he could catch the ball like one. He wasn't even a quarterback, and he threw the football like one. And this got people contemplating, if he could play more than one position, how come they won't allow it? Their argument was he was too small, too skinny, he'll get run the hell over. And he proved on 10 different occasions that size doesn't matter. When they say size doesn't matter, Barry Sanders is proof that size doesn't matter. He would do things in football games that were considered superhuman, that the average football player would not be able to do physically. The feats that he was doing, the way he would do these feats, the way he would get in between 3 motherfuckers and you couldn't hit him was amazing. It's like imagining Allen Iverson. What if he never played basketball? What if Allen Iverson played football instead? Barry Sanders was that. He was Allen Iverson playing football. You couldn't see him. You couldn't catch him. You didn't know what direction he was going to run. It was like chase me if you can concept. It's like chasing a fine-ass woman that's buck wild loose, and she go, order for you to get this ass, you got to chase. And you chase, and you chase, and you chase. And you know how this game chase ends. You know how this game chase ends, people. It ends with you losing and motherfucker gone. Barry Sanders was like that. Barry Sanders would have this confident look on his face and say, all right, mother, catch me if you can. And couldn't nobody really catch him. You had maybe 2 or 3 of the world's best running backs to actually catch up to him. At one point, there was an argument on TV who could really catch him, Deion Sanders or Jerry Rice, who could really stop Barry Sanders. And they asked Barry Sanders, I think in one of these interviews, who do you think can really get me? And he kind of had this super confident look, like he wanted to say, neither one of them can catch me. But he went, to answer your question, it's more of Jerry Rice or Herschel Walker that probably could get me, or maybe Emmitt Smith than Deion Sanders. And a lot of people kind of was shocked of his answers. Now, I don't know if he said that on the exact lines, but the look he had on his face when they did the interview, even up to his retirement, he pulled a Michael Jordan move. He kind of had to look like, if I wanted to come back and dominate some of these guys in the 2000s, I actually could if I want to. I mean, this guy was that good. Now, the fact that he never won a championship, the fact that he has never won a Super Bowl just goes to show you that as great as he was, this football team made the playoffs maybe 3 or 4 times in 10 years. I remember they lost their first playoff game when he first got there. And then I think in year 2 or year 3, they went back to a playoff. This time they won a playoff game. And I think he had a period where he went to 2 years in a row of winning playoff games. So that was like 3 times they made an attempt to go to the playoffs. Then they hadn't gone to a playoff game in 5 years. And then by the time they got to 97, 98, they made their last attempt to make a push for the playoffs. And unfortunately, they got eliminated and knocked out of it. And then finally in 1999, he retired because he saw that in all the years he played, Why is it so difficult to get to the final level? So it's just unfortunate, as great as he was, he never got to win a championship. I mean, and he was Detroit's hope. When they say hope in movies and TV, real life is actually describing what the movies mean. He was Detroit's finest. You had RoboCop and you had Barry Sanders. Barry Sanders is going down in history and is still considered one of the greatest professional football players to be a running back. And some argue the actual greatest football player of all times, even though some people will come in the comments and section and say he ain't never won a championship, so how is he the greatest player? There are a lot of football players that are considered great but have never won a championship in their whole entire illustrious career. Dan Marino never won one. Barry Sanders ain't never won one. Let's see. What's his name? That guy that used to play on the Baltimore Ravens. I think his name's Dante Culpepper. He ain't never won a championship either. So there's a lot of great football players that have never won nothing great. But in those 10 years, there was nobody back then, and there is nobody today that could actually match his running power, his speed, his philosophy. You still to this day can't even begin to figure out who could you get to compare him. Now, 20 years later, they found two football players that could match him speed-wise, but it's still debatable if they could actually take him on in a football game. You know, some argue Herschel Walker could actually get him. But like I said, and then there's Bo Jackson. He ran fast for a guy of his massive height. So you see the comparisons already. So now let's get to Steve Mcnair. Now, Steve Mcnair is an actual quarterback, a black quarterback. Before NFL started having black quarterbacks, the first black quarterback or second black quarterback they would have in the NFL was no other than Steve Mcnair. Now, as a kid going to high school, and I had the privilege to see him play on television. I mean, this guy was doing things that Cam Newton was already doing. Like, he was Cam Newton before there was Cam Newton. He had television commercials. He was rich. He was famous. He was young, successful, black, a black quarterback. And he was playing with the Houston Oilers before they called themselves the Houston Texans. And then they got traded to the team that made him their fighting chance, the Tennessee Titans. And he won a lot of football games. He won the most football games. And I think for about 7 out of 10 years, they would go to the playoffs every single year. Every single year for 7 years, he kept taking the Tennessee Titans to the playoffs. They would win their first playoff game, and it was always when they got to the second playoff game or the third playoff game, they would either lose to a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Green Bay Packers, the Seattle Seahawks, the Denver Broncos. They would lose to football teams like that every time they try to get past the second football game or the third football game. That's who they end up losing to. And then there were games where he would put on these legendary comebacks. I mean, he would do things that Tom Brady's known for. Like, he would come back from a 20-point, 30-point deficit in a football game and bring their ass all the way back, tie up the score, send the football game into overtime, and before you can even open a can of fruit and cocktail, they won the football game. You're like, what? Tennessee Titans came back, what? And if you betted money against the Tennessee Titans, you lost all your money for the night. Because Steve Mcnair was kicking ass and taking names. On the football field, he was everyone's inspiration. In fact, Baltimore Ravens' Ray Lewis kind of looked up to Steve Mcnair as one of the guys that you would go to when it comes to terms of football. That was who he would look up to. That's who he confided in a lot of times on and off the football field. Other guys were inspirations. And he was revered because he was the first, if not the first, he was the second or third premier NFL black quarterback. and it gave black people in the black community some hope. Now, they did go to the Super Bowl during the time he played, and they lost in the Super Bowl. You know, same thing that happened to the Atlanta Falcons when they faced the New England Patriots. It was the same exact thing. They did good for the first 2 quarters, and then all of a sudden, the second 2 quarters, they lost control of the football game. All of a sudden, he got seriously injured, seriously hurt. He was an injured quarterback trying to play hurt, and all of a sudden, he couldn't throw the football the same way. And after losing that Super Bowl, he wasn't really the same Steve Mcnair anymore. It was like now his game started to suffer and decline after that. And then finally, after 10 years of playing on one football team, he was traded to the Baltimore Ravens, where he and Ray Lewis would both become the focal point of that football team. You know, he played maybe 1 or 2 seasons, and then he, wanted to try to go back to the Tennessee Titans to finish out his NFL career, and then he retired. Now, off the football field, he had a reputation too. He was a ladies' killer. He was a notorious womanizer, and God rest his soul, rest in peace. It is a tragedy on what happened to him. I mean, some say he was depressed because he never got over the fact that he lost in a Super Bowl. The fact that you take a team and you put an NFL team on your back for 7 years, you go to the playoffs for 7 out of 10 years, and then all of a sudden you find yourself traded to the Baltimore Ravens. You're determined to prove that you could still play at a high level, and then you do, but then it doesn't pay off. So he retired from the NFL, and he felt he had no identity. You know, he missed who he once was. He tried to make a comeback into the NFL, contemplated a couple of times. And the Tennessee Titans said he would be welcome to come back if he wanted to come back. And there were talks leading up to that moment where that tragedy happened, that he was going to make a comeback, that he was contemplating. Maybe I play 1 year, maybe I play half a year. It was one of those, I'm contemplating on doing it, or I'm not doing it, or I'm saying I might do it. You know how that happens. And, people always ask this question, who is actually better? Now, in Barry Sanders' case, he only played 10 years. And he retired at 30 or 31. And it wasn't until 20 years later that he wrote a book. In fact, he actually wrote 4 autobiographies. And one of those, he said that he could have played 10 more years and contended for a championship if the coach and the staff actually showed that they actually cared about the city of Detroit. He would have played more, but he saw a city that didn't care about winning a championship. He saw a group of corporate people, let's put it that way, who felt that they just wanted money and they weren't really interested in winning a championship. Now, they've asked him that 10 times in the past 20 years, and every time they ask him that, his conclusion is, you just figure it out. Don't put words in my mouth. That's basically what Barry Sanders is saying, don't put words in my mouth. And to that day, it's become a controversial thing. So, who do we choose? I mean, it's difficult to say Steve Mcnair because he might have gone to the playoffs 7 out of 10 years with the Tennessee Titans and then again with the Baltimore Ravens. But then again, he lost in the Super Bowl. And then we have a guy who went to the playoffs 4 times in his 10-year football career, but he never actually got to win. He won a playoff game maybe once or twice in the first game, but he never won the second game, and he never had a chance to see if he can get to the third game, because you got to win 3 games to get to a Super Bowl, and he never got to that point. So it's kind of hard in this video to really tell you right off the bat who really is actually better. In this case, I'll probably say this will be the only rule of an exception that I'll ever do this. This will be the second time that I'll ever do this in the video. It's a tie. Why? Because had Steve Mcnair actually continued playing with the Baltimore Ravens, he probably would have won a championship. But he wasn't sure. And he kind of retired in the same way Barry Sanders did, with a lot of doubt and with a lot of wondering, what if this could have happened? What if that could have happened? Barry Sanders, I would say that the real answer on who really is actually better would probably be Barry Sanders, because the guy could have played 10 more years, and who knows what could have happened. It could have been the quarterback versus the running back. I'm just doing this because both football players were the heroes of the city and town that they played in for so many years. One guy comes to the city of Detroit, and the whole city of Detroit embraces him. We get another guy who comes to Tennessee, and he's just embraced and loved, even up until the tragedy. A lot of times it's hard for people to come on here and talk about it, because a lot of people liked it, Steve McNair's personality. You were homeless, the guy took out his wallet and handed you $100 bill and said, go buy you some lunch. Your car broke down, Steve McNair would be nice enough to go call AAA and get your car fixed. You didn't have no place to live, you found yourself sleeping in a hotel room the next night. So people loved it, Steve McNair's personality. The problem was the guy just couldn't keep it in his pants. And I know what that feels like. And I'm sure that it wasn't just that. He was depressed about the fact he couldn't win a Super Bowl. And a lot of people don't know how hard it is that when you put so much hard work into something and it doesn't pay off, it leads to alcohol, it leads to drugs, and it often leads to depression. So I hope you like this NFL video. This will be one for quite a while, so it took me a while to get to episode 13. And the next two videos, you're going to be blown the hell away for what I have in store for you in those videos. I promise you, episode 14 is going to be the NFL versus the Canadian Football League. What do I think about that? And then to finish off the series, episode 15 going to be the NFL versus the XFL, because somebody named Vince McMahon wants to bring back the XFL. So stay tuned for the last two episodes. Woo!